Hi guys, so I'm going to do a different type of video. I'm going to explain the early history of Lex Luthor. So, before I talk about Lex Luthor, his immediate predecessor and Superman's first supervillain, and one of the very first supervillains ever made, was the Ultra Humanite, who first appeared in Action Comics number 13 of June 1939. So the reason I'm talking about Ultra Humanite before Lex Luthor is that Ultra Humanite, or Ultra for short, he was a bald mad scientist who wanted to take over the world, which was exactly what Lex Luthor was in the 1940s to the 1980s. So as a result, it's very easy to mix up the two. So that's why I'm talking about Ultra Humanite, because he was basically Lex Luthor before Lex Luthor first appeared. If I could explain that properly. But unlike Lex Luthor, Ultra did not have a real name. He was elderly and he was in a wheelchair. Ultra Humanite would fight Superman 2 more times in Action Comics number 14 and 17. In number 14, there was a goon Ultra has who looks like Lex Luthor does in his first appearance. But I think this is just a coincidence. So he looks like like Lex Luthor in his early appearances as this goon, but he's not. I don't think he's actually Lex Luthor. I think it's just a coincidence that he looks like that, because they wouldn't have planned it out back then. But yeah, that's so Ultra Humanite and Lex Luthor are extremely similar characters. So people could probably get easily confused between them. So in Ultra Humanite's fourth appearance in Action Comics number 19, he would die by being struck by his own laser. And then Ultra would reappear in the next issue, number 20, this time having transferred his mind via a device he made into the body of an actress named Dolores Winters. So Ultra Humanite transferred his mind into into a woman. So basically this was very weird. And this might have been the first trans comic book character. That's very debatable. In the next issue, number 21, Ultra Humanite makes his or hers last appearance in the Golden Age, when she would seemingly die when Ultra's volcano lair would blow up. So this was the last appearance of the supervillain, Ultra Humanite. Also, I should say Ultra Humanite is probably one of the first supervillains ever to exist. I don't know if I previously mentioned that. But Ultra Humanite would reappear in the 80s in Justice League number 195, where he would have a new gorilla body and be retconned as a Justice Society villain rather than a Superman villain. So why they switched Ultra Humanite, who was Superman's first arch nemesis with Lex Luthor, is probably because they didn't want to cop out another fake death of Ultra Humanites. They didn't want another fake death. They wanted to make it seem like he actually died, or she actually died. And they probably, Ultra Humanite was becoming too bizarre of a character. He's becoming too weird. So that's probably why they replaced him with Lex Luthor. So Lex Luthor first appeared in Action Comics number 23, April of 1940, at the end of a 2-part story called Europe at War, where Luthor orchestrated a war between two European countries. So World War II is going on at this time, and this story was a direct parallel of that happening. So for a very long time, Lex Luthor was just called Luthor in the 40s and 50s. That was just his name. He didn't have a first name. His name was just Luthor. They just called him Luthor in the comics. That was until Adventure Comics number 271 of April 1960, where his first name was given as Lex. Originally, this was short for Alexis Luthor, but it was later retconned to be Alexander Luthor. So I'll talk about that comic in a bit. Luthor was seen in his early appearances to basically just be sort of like his businessman counterpart. He wasn't really a mad scientist. In his first 3 appearances, he's just seen like manipulating people to do whatever he wanted. He wasn't a mad scientist until a little later, but yeah, well, very early on, he was just depicted as being manipulating people. So in his earliest appearances, he is shown as a middle-aged man, so he had a full head of hair like Luthor did. He wasn't bald. But less than a year after he first appeared, however, an artistic mistake resulted in Luthor being depicted as completely bald in a newspaper strip. And the original error for this is attributed to Leo Nowak, who is a studio artist who illustrated for the Superman dailies during this period. One hypothesis is that Nowak mistook Luthor for Ultra Humanite. I think this is the actual answer, because in one of the same issues his hair goes, he starts becoming a mad scientist like Ultra Humanite. So I think that's the actual answer. He was confused with Ultra Humanite because they were sort of similar. Other evidence suggests Luthor's design was confused with that of a stockier bald henchman in Superman number 4. And Luthor's next appearance occurred in Superman number 10. So that was his first in the actual comic, not the newspaper strips, but the actual canon comics. So where he was bald. This was May 1941, in which Nowak depicted him as significantly heavier with visible jowls, this is when he started becoming the mad scientist. So the character's abrupt hair loss has been made reference to several times over the course of his history. In 1960, Jerry Siegel altered Luthor's backstory. So Jerry Siegel was the co-creator of Superman with Joe Shuster, and he changed this in Adventure Comics number 271. In Adventure Comics number 271, in the aforementioned story, it's retconned that Superman and Lex Luthor were friends when they were teenagers. When Luthor tried to find an antidote for kryptonite, an explosion ended up happening, and Luthor lost all of his hair, which in this story is seen as being brown rather than the red, which was previously seen in the Golden Age. Later, the red hair would return later on. Luthor believed Superboy was responsible for the fire, because he was jealous of Luthor, so they became enemies from there. Now, there is an earlier story that contradicts Adventure Comics number 271, which was written in 1958, where Lex Luthor is shown to be older than Superboy so when Superman was Superboy, Luthor was seen to be a much older person. But this was retconned to be in another universe. So by the 1970s, Luthor was being designed as skinnier and more muscular. And this was also in the early 80s, so the Bronze Age. But then after Crisis on Infinite Earths in the late 80s, he was drawn again to be overweight. And he was drawn as having hair in A Man of Steel by John Byrne. He was balding, very obviously balding, but he had red hair. But then eventually, when that miniseries ended, he just was bald but overweight. But this would again be changed in the early 90s. Luthor would be a very convoluted storyline where Luthor got replaced by a clone of his, where he cloned himself and pretended he was his own son, because his body was dying from kryptonite poisoning. And yeah, it's very convoluted, but Luthor when he was in this clone body, had a red beard and a red mullet, which is really weird looking. But eventually he would just return back to normal eventually. But, well, not back to normal because he wouldn't be overweight. From then on out, Luthor would be like a muscular, kind of skinny guy or skinny or muscular kind of guy. From there, he wouldn't be overweight anymore. But also in the late 80s, instead of being a mad scientist, Luthor would be like a businessman. Like, instead of a mad scientist, he'd be like a legitimate businessman. Or not a legitimate one, but like he'd be seen as one. And eventually there'd be a story called Lex 2000, where Luthor ran for president in 2000, and he would become elected president in the comics. But eventually, he would be impeached in the Superman Batman Public Enemy story. He would be impeached as president, and that's when Lex Luthor got exposed for being a villain in the New Earth continuity. I'm less familiar with the newer comics, but I think in the New 52, I remember when that was out, then a lot of that's not, for Superman, that's no longer canon, or no longer part of continuity. But he was written more as being a mad scientist than that. But now I think nowadays he's still a businessman. I personally prefer Lex Luthor to be a mad scientist, like just obsessed with taking over the world. I don't know, him being a businessman. I feel like Morgan Edge, the Superman villain, Morgan Edge should be the businessman type Superman villain. Lex Luthor should be more the scientist villain. That's what my personal opinion on that. So yeah, obviously Lex Luthor is one of the most popular villains. His yeah, he's had numerous, like, in every single thing Superman's been in, with the exception of Superman 50 show, he's basically had Lex Luthor there. So yeah, but anyway, this is just a very brief overview about Lex Luthor, because I saw Lex Luthor, people can get confused between him and Ultra Humanite, because they look very similar. And I just wanted to explain why Ultra Humanite was replaced as Superman's, Lex Luthor replaced Ultra Humanite as Superman's archenemy. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this video. If you could like, comment, or subscribe, that'd be appreciated. Thank you, and I'll see you guys later.